ขอต้อนรับทุกท่านนะคะกลับ
Yes, welcome back everyone to the second session of Blue Carbon Conference. In the first session, we learned what blue carbon is and how it can actually reduce global warming. So let's move on to the session 2, how enhancing mangrove and seagrass restoration and protection. Today, we are honored to have several experts who will come and talk about the models, challenges, and also methods for mangrove and seagrass restoration so that you can apply this in the future. So may I invite Mr. Professor Sakanan Plathong from the Faculty of Science, Prince Songkhla University, please. Yes, good morning again. I think several of you are still taking the break, but we would like to move on from this morning session. If you follow the morning session from the very first opening remarks, our keynote speaker, Kun Dindo, has mentioned an issue which is extremely important is that we are moving towards blue carbon, but we should not focus only on blue carbon. We should look at the reality that's happening behind everything. It is an ecosystem service. It's a biodiversity eco-service. You should not focus only simply on the carbon sequestration. You should ask what the community can gain from the ecosystem service and whether we can still it's still beneficial for them as a carbon credit. So in this session, we will focus on the target of blue carbon, 300,000 rai of mangrove or seagrass for blue carbon sink. If we are aiming for this conservation, what are the processes for revival, rehabilitation of the seagrass or seaweed? We have several speakers, 4 in all, and 1 from overseas. The first, Miss Maeve Nightingale from IUCN. She will be explaining about the 3 models of mangroves protection and restoration for ecosystem services. Ms. Maeve, please. And secondly, our second panelist is an expert on the mangrove ecosystem and revival. Very important scholar, Dr. Sonjai Hawanon, who will be talking to us about the mangrove forest. There will be several mentions, our aim of 300,000 rai. What should we do in the next 3 years? How we are going to be able to achieve the concept, not simply focusing on the blue carbon. We want the ecosystem service and biodiversity as well. Another important panelist is Assistant Professor Dr. Anchana Pratep, from the point of view of carbon credit and revival and restoration, how the academics will view this. And another panelist is Ms. Sukjin Chun from the Marine and Coastal Conservation Department of Korea National Park Service. She will be providing cases of blue carbon conservation through the ecosystem restoration in the Korean marine national parks. Now, First, we want to see the conservation of explanations and models of the conservation of mangroves. What are the point of view from an international perspective? May I invite Ms. Maeve Nightingale from IUCN to explain to us about protection and restoration of the ecosystem. We have 1 hour, 15 minutes. So can I ask you to spend about 15 minutes on your presentation, and then afterwards it will be a question and answer session, about 15 minutes at the end. May I invite Ms. Maeve, please?
Thank you very much. And it's a great pleasure to be here, dignitaries and friends, to have this very important conversation. I can hear already from the morning that there's been immense developments over the last year, both on the discussion and understanding about blue carbon, but also on some of the policies and the instruments that are going to be essential for achieving this. So it's a great pleasure to be here, and my sort of task today is to talk really a bit more focusing on mangroves and mangrove restoration, a little bit of global perspective, a little bit touching on the Thai perspective, some of the Thai targets. And what better timing today? The State of the World's Mangroves report came out the day before yesterday, 2022 version, which gives us up-to-date data up to 2020 from Mangrove Watch. This is real-time satellite data. And it's telling us that there's a loss of mangroves of 11,700 square kilometers since 1996. This is in fact a slight increase on what we thought the net loss globally was since the last report, which was up to 2016. But that's not because we've actually gained mangrove, it's because the maps have become a little bit more accurate, and we have seen some increase in mangrove areas in some of the key deltas. So although rates of loss are greatly diminished globally, there's an average now of 66 square kilometers per year. This progress is patchy, and I'm afraid in the Southeast Asia region we continue to need to really focus our action on scaling up and turning the tide on mangrove loss and conserving and restoring mangroves. There is still areas of severe depletion going on in Southeast Asia. Just to remind ourselves, when we're talking about restoration and protection and conservation, what are some of the key drivers or threats affecting mangroves? And these include the losses that are driven by the combination of direct human impact, such as the clearance and conversion of land from logging, aquaculture, agriculture, urban development, urban expansion, but also the natural and indirect causes, which are accounting for about 38%. And these are attributed to some of the changes influenced by climate change. So the erosion, sea level rise, storms and droughts, these are affecting and influencing mangrove ecosystems to a great level. And again, just to reiterate our issues in Southeast Asia, nearly 80% of the human-driven losses occur in just 6 nations: Indonesia, Myanmar, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand and Vietnam, although for a very much lesser extent in Thailand, I'm happy to say. So when we look at conservation and protection, the focus for this today, my input today is on restoration, but let's just reiterate again the need to protect the remaining mangroves that are here with us today. Currently, globally, about 42% of the remaining mangroves are within protected areas, but again, this varies across the world. Within Southeast Asia, an average of 13% mangroves are covered by formal designated protected areas. So it's good progress, and I'm afraid in Thailand, I think it's probably 6 or 7% formally covered. And we can talk more about how we can increase that, not just through the permanent forms of protection, which we have great examples through DNP, etc., but also this increasing discussion around other effective area-based conservation methods. These could be private sector owned lands, it can be community managed lands. So there are other forms of protection that we can be looking at to enhance the area of protection of the existing mature secondary forest mangroves. So focusing now just on the task for today on the restoration side, there's no better incentive for mangrove restoration than the rapid loss and fragmentation and degradation that we can think of. But also we can see that the carbon market, the opening up of the carbon market and the nationally determined contributions and net zero ambitions of many companies are also driving an interest in mangrove restoration, and we've heard so much detail about that this morning. It's been very interesting, and I hope maybe within this room there's possibility to even talk about a review of the NDCs or the nationally determined contributions to look at environment sector as a key sector in terms of reducing emissions. I think that would be an important policy driver, and in the run-up to the COP later this year, early next year, I think that would be a really interesting conversation to be had. So almost 2,000 kilometers of mangroves have been planted in the last 40 years, and as about 8,000 kilometers, nearly 1 million kilometers squared, remain to be considered in biophysically suitable for restoration. Not all areas that have been degraded are able to be restored. And there are some new mangrove restoration potential maps which come with this updated data that is released the day before yesterday. And I just want to take a quick look at what it looks like for Thailand. If you look at what those satellite maps are telling us, it says that within Thailand, around 6.29% of mangroves are within protected areas. Of the 232,000 odd hectares, about 17,000 hectares are restorable, so 7% of the total area of mangrove as of 2016, which is about a 60% retention. Now, I know that when we look at DMCR and the actual statistics on the ground, which are validated by Professor Sonchai and many of you here, this probably is a very simplistic view. This is data generated by satellite images, and so it needs that national policy sphere and influence. And of course, it doesn't look at land tenure. And land tenure is a really critically important aspect when we're looking at social engagement and who has the incentives and drives to restore and protect mangroves.
May I clarify something, please? For the percent of the protected mangrove, you mean that is the mangrove in the national park, right?
Yes.
Okay.
The
yes.
formerly protected areas.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
And this will be data coming from the WCPA database. So again, it will be different possibly from the national data. We know there's a greater area probably actually under real protection if we look at national data.
Yeah.
So just to touch on some of the mangrove restoration approaches, broadly speaking, and I'll go through these just to familiarize everybody, we have sort of, broadly speaking, 5 different approaches: the traditional mangrove restoration, the natural mangrove regeneration, assisted natural regeneration, which is something in between. And then we have a nice thinking around some of the pond restoration, silviculture, areas which were previously aquaculture ponds, and then specific techniques for eroding coastline restoration. So just to familiarize everybody, the traditional mangrove restoration, it follows some of the same principles as restoration of terrestrial forest, the collecting of seeds, the nursery reared seedlings, transplanting of seedlings by hand. And general result is single or 2 or 3 species composition, relatively limited biodiversity compared to natural systems, and often we've seen, if we look at the statistics, low survival rates, because of that ecosystem integrity and the functioning of the results of that approach. So restoration has meant often planting trees, and success has been measured in terms of numbers of seedlings planted or area planted, and some of the areas have showed very high mortality rate. And often to avoid some of the conflicts in land tenure, unsuitable sites have been chosen and selected, which is also an understandable driver. If we look at natural regeneration on the complete opposite side, and there are many groups that advocate for this, including the Mangrove Action Plan, the ecological mangrove restoration, which is about creating the preconditions for self-repair and secondary succession. That's looking at restoring the hydrological conditions which allow for natural systems regeneration. And in many cases, this, in a practical terms, it means breaking down bunds of shrimp ponds, aquaculture ponds, which is quite a high capital investment. It also involves a very deep understanding of the autoecology of the site, the individual species, the community ecology, and the patterns of reproduction and distribution. So it's a long-term, ideal restoration approach, but then we know that often we're looking for short-term gains and capital investment in planting. Sorry, just to go back. The assisted regeneration is something in between, where you have a natural regeneration and then you have planting, active planting within the site, which mimics the natural taxonomy of the species composition, land to sea. The restoration of shrimp ponds, aquaculture ponds, has also become a very big interest, and we see in Vietnam, actually in Cà Mau, the southern province, a complete conversion to extensive shrimp ponds, extensive production shrimp ponds being restored with mangroves, and a move towards organic production of shrimp, which are now certified and have an increased value on the market. And finally, the other form, which is a very specific interest in these in high energy coastlines, rapidly eroding coastlines, where it's necessary to trap and settle sediment in order for mangrove restoration to take place. And we see various different models of this, from the T-fences to the bamboo fences, fencing semi-permeable structures. And there are a lot of good examples, both here in Thailand and in Indonesia, with the Building for Nature program, that show great successes in increasing stabilization of sediment and mangrove restoration. But in general, there's a movement towards the more natural systems of regeneration, improving the functionality of systems in themselves. So I look for some data on, well, what is the result of all of this restoration? Okay, what is, a lot of people say natural systems are better than planted systems, but where is the proof? Where is the evidence? And I've only found really one study that is an extensive, comprehensive study, and that was done in 2021 by Tokyo University. They look at 187 mangrove restoration sites, mainly in Southeast Asia. And they have seen that, yes, there are positive ecological outcomes from 88% of those 187 sites. There's definitely mangrove growth and gain in sediment accretion when the sites are suitably chosen and the appropriate methodology is used. However, restored mangroves provide higher ecosystem function than unvegetated sites. This is logical, but there was no conclusive evidence as to whether or not naturally regenerated or planted systems were actually better in terms of improving ecosystem outcomes. 175 of the 187 cases of restoration were only planting one single species. And so the functional ecological value of those systems was by nature not as high as it could be. And these species are mainly Rhizophora and Abyssinia. So just to remind us all, what are we looking for when we say a successful restoration of mangrove? We're looking for an established, sizable, diverse, functional, and self-sustaining mangrove system. And it may take, of course, we're not talking just 3 years or 10 years, 20 years to achieve this. And that the benefits are both for nature and for people. So just to mention very quickly the trends, it's very difficult actually to find studies which are uniform in their analysis, and I think there's a great interest and need to improve our research in terms of improving our quantitative synthesis of mangrove restoration outcomes. We need better research looking at cost benefits, ecological outcomes, and benefits to communities and society. But when we look at cost benefit, there's been a range from $23 per hectare to up to $371,000 per hectare. And this really depends on the site and what is required to restore the site. But there's also a really wide difference in the cost of labor that's been involved in the 187 sites that were studied. But overall, the cost benefit analysis suggests that it does make sound economic sense to invest in mangrove restoration. And particularly when we look at not only the carbon value, but the bundled ecosystem services. So we're looking at at not only the carbon potential of these systems, but all the productive ecosystems benefits as well, being quantified in economic terms. It's also important, and this was another key finding across all the sites, that when ecosystem services have local effects, such as the protection against disasters and the provisioning of products such as ecotourism opportunities or fisheries, and they are perceived by local coastal communities as having benefit to local communities, there is more meaningful engagement. And so it's about looking beyond the climate and the carbon, but looking for local options for benefit sharing. And this is often in the form of poverty alleviation, livelihood development, but yes, as well, if there's an opportunity for equity and benefit sharing from the carbon market, if carbon credits are going to be monetized and shared with those stakeholders that have been involved in restoration. So it's about looking at other services beyond the carbon, the bundled ecosystem services, to look at the total value and cost benefit of these systems. And again, we need a lot more research to demonstrate that cost benefit holistically to be able to look at investments in a systematic way. So this is the last, the main conclusions is most effects of mangrove conservation and restoration initiatives that follow good science and are supported and engaged in by communities and other stakeholders are successful. We have quantitative synthesis of mangrove restoration outcomes is needed. We need more research looking at the ecological outcomes, the cost-benefit outcomes, and this can guide policy and actions in terms of biodiversity investment. And yes, there are financial mechanisms that can build long-term security for mangroves, but the systems, institutions, policies, and benefit sharing arrangements need to be well thought out. And I can see from the conversations with TGO this morning, there's huge advances happening in this field. And once again, I'm just going to reiterate, let's halt all further loss of existing natural secondary mangroves in Southeast Asia. Thank you.
ครับนะครับ
Thank you very much, Ms. May, from your dimension of ecology and environmental protection. You can see former restoration of the mangrove forest, a traditional way. Many times it was just a mono-species replanting, which of course may have a negative effect. You are just growing or replanting, but in terms of the ecosystem, you require biodiversity as well as the many types of species. And what is most important, you've heard the word ecosystem service from the keynote speaker in the beginning. You should remember this word. It's extremely important. You're talking about carbon credit, blue carbon, that is part of it. But the importance of the ecosystem as a biodiversity and the eco service for the coastal services is equally important. So we should look at revival of the coastal and mangrove areas. We will have Dr. Sonjai Hawanon who will tell us about what we have done in Thailand. How do you revive the area?
For the topic of restorations of mangrove forests, we have to accept that. We already been working on the restorations for a long time. My apologies, who's controlling this, the slide? We need the one for Dr. Somjai, please. Dr. Somjai, we need the correct file. Okay. We've been working on this for a long time. What we see is now, it's just recently, but actually, historically, it's 50, 60 years that we've been working on this. The mangrove forest, that is the healthy one, and that is that we could benefit for the purpose of the coastal erosions. We have that for quite a extended time already. But for the planting, we look up the zonation. Zonation is just up and coming. Previously at the Department of Forestry, we just look at the area that is been degraded and we just plant there. But mostly it's just for the mangrove only, because mangrove is useful for the making the coal, and then we use it for making this for the, and then that's why we need to grow the mangrove, which is the best quality. And if we grow other, it might not be very useful to make charcoal. And the best one is the mangrove for the economic purpose to make charcoal at that time. But after we terminate the concessions, they turn to growing the forest to restore the ecosystem. Why not make it the more diverse, not the monocrop? There's arguments about this. So I mean the specialists as well of the IUCN, they set up the group for 60s, 70s from the global expert. And then it been rest because pause before you plant. You need to consider before you plant. Because if we plant it like a mass monocrop, monospecies, so why don't we think of planting something that's more suitable for the topography? So for the mangrove forestations, we have to consider the landscape as well. If not, it's not going to be suitable. So we look at the zonation of the mangrove forest. We will see that if it's next to the sea, it would be the Avicennia germina, and the next one would be the mangrove, and on the upper ground near the land would be Sonerata, Agiceras, and then that would be for the on land. But there's a transitional zone as well, so ecotone. Ecotone is the seam between the land and the sea. And the seam between the land and the sea would create more diversity of the species. So if we talk about the specific mangrove forest, there's 55 species estimate in the global area. In Thailand, we have almost 40. That's why we can have the International Botanical Mangrove Forest here in Thailand. But if it's an ecotone or the seam between the land and the sea, there would be also the terrestrial species. It's called associated mangrove. Associated mangrove would be quite abundant as well. In some area, it's like 100 species, 70, 80 species, depending on the terrestrial. Yes, if I may, do you consider that mangrove forest the ecotone? Ecotone is an area that is salted seawater, but it's not very salty, not a high salinity, and they call that mangrove area or salt marshes. So, but where during rainy season it would not be very high in saline, but if it's a drought area or dry season, it would be more salty. So the mangrove forests have 90, 70, 80 species according to the location. So it's different than terrestrial forest. Mangrove forest is about zonation. Zonation is that if you're next to the sea, you will see that there's a lot of the Avicennia, but if it's Andaman, we would have just the other Rhizophorus. And if it's a flood is higher, it's for Rhizophora. So the Rhizophora would have the successions in the area that would be developed already as well. That the soil is quite hard, and it would grow there. And on the top would be other species as well, like prung dang like others, and it doesn't have those kind of looped roots. So those kind of trees would be in the hard soil or hard mud. It cannot be in the soft mud area. Like the area that have Avicennia, it would all die. You know, you can't plant those kind of tree in the soft mud. So it has its own territory, and you have to plant it accordingly. You can't just make it like the terrestrial forest, but for the mangrove forest is depending on the salinity, the sea, the sea level, the water seepage as well. Underground water that's mixed in and reduce the salinity of the soil. So these are the diverse factors we need to think, but in total it's about 50 species. So we need to understand why before we just plant just the rhizophora because it's made into charcoal, but now we have more. But so they plant a kind of tea that's similar to teak. So that's why they want to expedite it because it survived well. But if we want to plant the other kind of tree that is very rare, it's hard to find the seed. So that's why they want to grow some other species that is easier to find the seedling to restore the ecosystem quicker because it would provide ecosystem services and also for the aquatic animal breeding grounds. So previously we have the 2.3 million for the year 1964, but before it's a 2.7 million, right? But it's all been destroyed. It's turned into land, turners landed, especially in the central part of Thailand, Samut Sakhon, Samut Songkhram. It's near Bangkok, and in the year 1989, it's destroyed to just 1.1 million, right? And the Deputy DG already mentioned the attempt on the restorations, and we have the DMCR established, and then we have the initiative from the king that the mangrove forest is important. So the restorations period started in the year 2002, and right now in the year 2021 we have 1.7 million, right? Is it enough? No. It's not enough. According to UNESCO, it has to be 80%. 80% from UNESCO specify that about 30-40 years ago. At that time, the shrimp aquaculture is very popular. So, but now they're trying to restore it. See, you see those disappearing mangrove forests in the central part of the country turn into land turners, have been land used, and those mangrove forests have been destroyed for salted farming. I know it's for economic gain, but the remaining mangrove forest is not sufficient for the coastal erosion. It's not strong enough as a natural barrier. If it's a strong wave coming in, that would be definitely a problem. So this is the one that they use for the charcoal just now, and there's a dredging of the waterway. And the mangrove forest, sometimes it's been eroded constantly. Our mangrove forest, we have to accept that it's not healthy. The root system is not the strong rhizophorus, and also nipa palm. Nipa palm, it's well, if we say that we mixed nipa palm with somewhere else, nipa, many locations, it's encroached it and then it stopped other species from growing. It turned into monospecies for nipa palm. In Nigeria also, they brought nipa palm from Thailand to grow it, and at the end, it's half the country turned into nipa palm forest, like. Because it's really encroaching very quickly and other trees cannot grow. In Indonesia as well, I observed demonstration site, the big rhizophora, when there's nipa palm, all die. So it turned into nipa palm forest. You see that in the central part of the country, a lot of nipa palm. that is fresh water, right? Yeah, it's fresh water, but if it's very salty, it would not grow. But if less salty, it grow well. So you have to plant it in the area that you can benefit it, near the community, that the people have this kind of farming. That would be more suitable. So when you plant it, you see the treetop density look like the lawns. So when there's the storm or lightning strike, it would be turned into the patches. And the tree that we plant is 20, 30 years. It's just tall. The roots are not expanding. So when it's not expanding, when it's fall, it would fall like dominoes. So in a number of areas like this, or even Siriraj, Sirinthorn, at Prasar, at Rayong as well. So this is the example, and across the country, this happened. So for the carbon credit in the futures, it's not that we're just going to look at to plant it for 1.5 times 1.5 and the tree would be tall, but according to the principle of forestry, it needs to be like trimming. You need to trim and like maybe have alternate spot like after 7-8 years trimming, and the root would grow deep and healthy and strong, and the biomass would be higher as well. It's not like we plant it like this. It would not get a lot of sequestration, only the tree tops. So if you want to plant it as a carbon credit, you have to trim, just like when you do gardening. You can make it so dense. The tree would just like going up, and can it absorb the CO2? Because the amount of the tree, comparing to the one that you do the trimming, and when it grows, it could spread out more. It could absorb carbon better. So the management of forestry, you need to look at it in a different way in the futures also. For the carbon credit, for the 300,000 rai that you're planning to do, there have to be a project that when the tree is growing, you have to measure the size. After it's finished, you have to trim so that it would grow again. But if it's growing as a curve, a straight curve, it's fine. It depends on the locations. So I'm sorry, I need to expedite. You have 45 slides, but I would go quick. How many more minutes do I have? 5 minutes. Okay, fine. So this is about the Harriet storm in Nakhon Si Thammarat in the year many years ago. And it destroyed the mangrove forest at Talumpuk Peninsula, and a lot of people died. But the mangrove forest could support it. But at that time, the status of the mangrove forest not healthy. But as more than 2,000 people died. That was in the year 1964. And after that, there was reforestation in Nakhon Si Thammarat because of Harriet storm in the year 1964. And then we have the Babuk storm. And when it hit Nakhon Si Thammarat, the velocity is becoming less, the strength is lessened. But they didn't look at it. They didn't look at the mangrove forest as a good natural barrier because it could reduce the wind speed. So only 3 or 4 fatalities and not a lot of damage caused. So this is the natural wall. Just like that is the reason why we need to preserve the mangrove forest. Just like in Bangladesh people also have to, preserve and conserve it. The tsunami as well. The village behind, they are all safe. More than 100 villages, and these are the royal initiative that I already declared. That the King Rama IX talked about this in the year 1991. So we have the day for the mangrove forest. So we have to focus on right species, right site. We have to have the right species plant in the right site. Then the right site, if you ask me, some area is not suitable. How can we plant this mangrove forest in the species that we want? So it has already been done as well. Why don't we plant the species that's suitable to that site, that environment? Why do we need to plant the one that we want? So it depends. Some area the soil is very hard, or you have some other trees, but some area want the Rhizophora, but if you plant the Rhizophora, it's all die. So you have to do the land adjustment, because it could generate the revenue for the community as well, because they want to make charcoal. So you need to think about the needs of the community as well. It's not that you plant some other species that is toxic. It could not be used for making charcoal. So this is the example. We need to do the land adjustment, so that it would be suitable also. And sometimes we plant something that's not suitable. And if the area is too low, the barnacle, the stone barnacle, would stick to this and then all die. The survival rate is very low. Before we encounter this kind of experience, that when we want to grow in the mud area, yeah, we can do it for raising awareness, etc., or to do PR. But you will see, this is example. But that pictures make me think. I see the back as Avicennia, but you plant Rhizophora before. Yeah, at the coastal area, we have a lot of Avicennia. If there's Avicennia, there's a lot of seedling. It would have the natural regenerations. It would slope out into the sea. And then we would plant Rhizophora afterward. But if you plant Rhizophora first, it's only suitable for some area. If there's more soil, just like Nakhon Si Thammarat, the sediment accumulations is very quick because there's erosions. At Nakhon Si Thammarat, when there's a lot of sedimentations, we can plant the Rhizophora. But if it's slow sedimentations, well, we need to focus on that. How much is it? What about the monsoon? And what about the sedimentation rate? And then we have to see also the current flow and see what species would be suitable for it. And this is the example for the forestations at Sirirat Nachini. I and Professor Sanit flew over there. At that time, Dr. Sanit was the head of the forestry. So they want to plant it in the abandoned shrimp farm. It's difficult because this area is hardly packed. It's so tightly packed, and we want to plant the mangrove forest. It's very difficult. We have to do the tillage. We have to plow it. And then the area is low, so we have to plant Avicennia. And the Avicennia, we have to determine also the current flow, and then afterward we plant Rhizophora, and that it turned into healthy forest. And this area actually we can't grow anything. I'm so sorry you run out of your presentation time. Thank you so much. So the main point. This is at Prasar Rayong, the same. They developed it, but the focus is on the ecosystem. And we need to think about birds as well. If there's a lot of birds, then we plant the mangrove forest, because this is very verdant area, like very high fertilities. And this is a mangrove forest Thun Kamom. It's an example site about the forestations from no forest at all. They can regrow a forest that has a biodiversity according to the natures, and also there's a study, and so with the integrated manners from the upstream, midstream, and downstream. So this is when the princess went for a visit and then grow the forest here. And this is the example. And this plant, they conserve it for the crab, for the mud crab, for the biodiversity. So that is all from my part. This is just example at Krabi, that if they don't plant it and just let it generate naturally, it would be slow. It could grow, but in some area it would not grow either. So we need to assist it. And so this is also the, and this is the amount of the volume of the forest that we want to plant, because UNESCO said it should be 80% of the previously existed mangrove forest. So in the Thai Gulf, we have to regrow 470,000 rai. So the area that we want to restore mangrove forest, we look at the dimensions of the ratios of the species. Is it like we want to just plant rhizophora because it's most useful? Even for the area not suitable for rhizophora, we still need to do the land adjustment so that rhizophora can grow. But for us to plant the trees, we think of ecosystem. Ecosystem, we need to think about human as well. The relationship between the living and non-living. When the peoples are involved, we need to consider the needs of the people as well. Why do we need to do the rice paddy? Because the people need to grow rice. And around their house, if they plant some tree that is toxic, it would be harmful for the children, for example. So we need to get rid of that toxic plant. Well, not get rid of it, but we need to do the zoning so that it would be in the area that is suitable for the natural regeneration, not just get rid of it. We need to consider the needs of the people. So it depends also on the people needs.
All right, we have Ajahn Anchana. Can you please tell us about the seagrass and how it is? How do you revive or restore the seagrass? So it's continue on from the first session when I mentioned. Can I have the slide? I will go quite quick. It's a deep dive into this concept of conservation and restoration. So we will look at the opportunity and the challenges, because it is a big challenge. It's not easy in terms of restoration, and it is a problem all over the world. Yes, this slide, thank you. So let's go back. This is our team, and if you look at the general operations during seagrass restoration, opportunity, threat, and conservation, our team partly works on seagrass and partly work on seaweed. For the seagrass, we did it simply. We do the tagging, monitoring, and the growth and the development of the seagrass. This is just a basic understanding how it grows, how fast it grows, and what species, what are the zonations. That is the basic biology that we are focusing on, and it's very important for application in terms of conservation and management. Now, go back. I still want to focus on this image. We don't want you to go to a different issue. When you are doing conservation, the lowest costs and with cost benefit, whether you grow mangrove or seagrass, it's not easy. But if anyone has an area in which you want to restore, I have a demonstration site. I've talked to one of the governors in Phetchaburi that we would be interested in revival of the seagrass as a restoration. So go back. Livelihood is extremely important. Sometimes don't forget, don't just focus on blue carbon. Ajahn Sakanan is very good about this, but we have not connected the area. We keep mentioning that blue carbon, nature-based solution is a huge topic for many countries. Like in the UK, they have a plan and a policy for nature-based solution for climate change, and how they link to the reduction of greenhouse gas emission. The second is German example. They design what ecology, how much it's going to contribute. It's about nature-based solution in Southeast Asia. You can relate that. But today is when you put all the various jigsaws together, so you can see the nature-based solution, how it can fulfill the gaps. The next is the funding from the EU. You can see that the skills at the global level is extremely important. Several sectors focus on this. We have Dow, SCG, IUCN, who assisting us in this. It's actually a very hot topic. COP26, many countries adopt this, and it's going to return as a cycle. For example, when you're talking about COP26, there was a University of Oxford issue a conference on nature-based support, and you can see the importance as well as possible roles of Thailand. It was virtual, online, so we can see our capabilities and skills. What does export do next? They set up courses. The courses provide nature-based solution course. It's like a private sector where they have sponsors. So if you come in and you talk, you put the jigsaws together and see what do you want, and after all, how would it help the country's resources. There's so many things that can happen. There are countries that do not have resources like the US, then they also focus on nature-based solution. So I would like you to look back in Thailand. We have several sectors here sitting together, and you should discuss it seriously, and it should be a policy of the country for nature-based solutions for carbon neutrality. Now, let's go back. In terms of seagrass, I've been working on research on seagrass, as mentioned, for 10 years. Because nature-based solution is a strong concept, and also the loss of resources is immense. So, example from Australia, we have various reviews. It was printed last year. Now, they are looking seriously at seagrass restoration and conservation. This is Australia at a glance. If you look at it, it is an idol for conservation. For example, if you look at the species, it's important as well. As Dr. Somchai has mentioned, is it mono-species or it should be multi-species? We should ask ourselves, how much do we know about these species? Monitoring, I mentioned, most people do a CSR, right? They're just taking pictures. So we really need to evaluate and monitor for success. And it has to follow. 10 years monitoring is usually mandatory in this subject if you want to follow it closely. What else are the concepts? The size selection, how should it be? These are basic biological concepts. We have knowledge and understanding on this one. If you look on the left, this seeding, tachylchysome, and it goes back. It grows well. So if you look at the Thailand's context, you have to set up zonation for the country, which area is already good, which area requires assistance, what context. We will need to use biology and ecology as a basis for assessment. Now, these are examples from the UK and Ireland. They have clear projects on seagrass. Millions of pounds are poured into this project. It's a huge scale. The same problem, the seagrass were destroyed. But when you're sitting here together, this is an example. It is a hot issue in 2021. Globally, every country is stirred up and started talking about this. Other areas as well. This is example at Western Indian Ocean. We want to have this aligned to our own context, and we need our own policy on nature-based solution. That is something I want to see, and that will fulfill our needs. Now, come back to the researcher point of view. When you see this, I'm happy to see the awareness and the participation of the community compared to other countries. This is a good capital. Maybe they lack the size, maybe they lack the technology, but they have the will. So you have to do a gap analysis. Actually, there's no well-defined site selection. That's a limitation. You just walk in and you put in a plant, it should be our duty as researchers to provide backup information. What are other problems? There's no clearly defined success. No monitoring. Of course, you come back a few days later, the grasses are gone. So this is something that you should check clearly and monitor for results. What we need is the local community involvement. They are there, it's in the front of their house. They are the right person for the job. Next is the restoration of success with carbon accumulation. How much accumulation of carbon is there? It is where researchers come in as well. We have some research. We need to do a gap analysis in terms of Thailand and then follow the trend. Now, if you, once you grow or replant, if you don't look after the threats, it will be all lost effort. So you have to mitigate the threats. The threat analysis also provide you with carbon credit. That is another dimension that should, if there are any areas which you want to do a threat analysis, you want to go and look at the methodology of TGO, because these are all capital under your belt. It's cheaper than just looking at carbon storage. I would like to invite all of you to consider this as well. Part of the threat has been identified. It's similar to the mangrove, where the threats are found in Southeast Asia. There are several dimensions involved. So you have to manage the threats, because if you replant and you don't take care of the threats, they will all be lost. Okay, there are success conservation efforts, there are success cases. This is a very small area in Thai Rai, Nakhon Si Thammarat. We went there because we were sponsored by BRT and Total companies. We go in to provide knowledge to the children in the areas, to the natural parks. You know, simple biology, simple ecology, nothing complex. This is part of the enchantment of working in the field. No fancy methodology involved. You only need your heart and the willingness of the people. So it is a chance to create community involvement, and you need to create success in the minds of the students. This is something that happened. In 2006, we set up a training. In 2008 to 10, we had a project. And then because we had to work back at the lab, but it's so, we were so happy because they continue with their work. They have ecotourism, edu-tourism. We don't know whether it's right or wrong, but it's stuck in their mind, and there was success. This is something that we saw when we get back in 2017. They have a process of ordinating the seagrass. You know, the monks go there and ordinate the seagrass in order to protect them. So this is like cultural diversity. This is something that is so charming about Thailand. You have this cultural dimension, and once this stuck with them, 10 years have passed, the seagrass amount have increased, and there are a lot of diversity for the sea life. The areas are expanded. At first, we did not understand, or we weren't looking at carbon sequestration, but afterwards, when you do more study, you can say the size is different, the area is muddy, how much seagrass has increased, how much carbon have increased. These are all add-on information if you really want to replant or restore. These values you have from this very small scale already, and you can use that to jumpstart. Maybe you can say blue carbon is a small thing, but what I want you to look at are the livelihood, the ecosystem service, more living species coming in. In the seagrass, we have bare sand, low density and high density. But gradually you can see the increased seagrass, increased aqua living animals. And apart from carbon, these dimensions you should never forget. So that's what I want to point out. It's actually a hot issue. So to understand the techniques of moving and replanting, we have a small scale. We have different species. We have like small and large leaf, right? You can see that the small leaves will, the ovalis will live much longer. So you can see that these are gaps in research. The results is that after 7 months, you can see the results have upscaled, the amount of seagrass have increased. It's actually a great effort to come to these findings. So if you have any areas, the preservation, conservation, this is a huge capital. What we were so happy about was that there are dugongs grazing in the area. So you can see biodiversity, and we collect this. You can see there are other animals, areas where there are seagrass or none of the seagrass. You can see biodiversity. So this is a small scale study in Trang. But for ourselves, we would like to have a team, we would like to have demonstration site, and then increase the overview of everything. Let's go back to this nature-based solution. This is the image I want to keep in your mind. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kun Anjana. So, Ajahn, that is great. You have focused on the importance of the area site selection. What are the success indicators for the revival of the ecology? Your indicator is it that seagrass, or is that the ecology, threat management? These are all capital. We have carbon credit already as well. And we have cost in the protection of our carbon credit, management of the existing carbon credit. We have to think about it carefully. This is a very important problem. It's even more than the restoration and actual replanting. Protecting what you have is more important. And also the species, right? The species have their own duty, have their own component of being in ecology. Sometimes we don't even know how important it is, or what are their roles in the ecological system. So we have to provide importance to the biodiversity. Actually, we have another presentation from Miss Sukjin Shun. Let's listen to the cases of blue carbon conservation through the ecosystem restoration in Korean Marine National Park. Kun Sukjin Shun, please present.
Sawadika, Windy Tairu Jaka. I am Sukjin Chan, Senior Program Officer of Marine Conservation Department in Korean National Park Service Headquarters. It is my great pleasure to present to you about blue carbon conservation cases in Korean coastal and marine national parks, focusing on the ecosystem restoration. Next. These are the contents of my presentation. I will start with an introduction to the status of Korean marine and coastal national parks with some challenges focusing on marine ecosystem damage. Following that, I will explain seagrass, salt marsh, and seaweed restoration cases. As cooperation with the local stakeholders is critical to site conservation, I will also introduce how KNPS makes the partnership with them. Next. Now let me explain the current status of Korean coastal and marine national parks. Next. There are 22 national parks in the Republic of Korea, and 4 of them are marine and coastal types under the management of KNPS. 한려해상 was the first designated marine and coastal national park in 1968, followed by 태안해안 in 1978, 다도해 해상 in 1982, and 변산반도 in 1988. The total area of the 4 marine national parks is 3,322.9 square kilometers, of which 82.6% is marine and 20 is land. 736 beautiful big and small islands are spread inside the boundary of this national park. Next. Such a large area of national parks are protecting not just for the natural and cultural landscape, but also one of the biodiversity hotspots on the peninsula for the effective and well-organized management of the area. Zones were made as shown on the slides. Around 75.3% of the area of marine and coastal national parks are natural environment zones, which function as buffer zones for the protection of core zones and where primary industry like aquaculture and fishing are allowed. Next. Coastal areas are facing many development pressures. Although aquaculture, fishing, and infrastructure construction is essential for the survival of local residents, it usually causes pollution and damage to the ecosystem, which is a big challenge for park management. Recent research revealed that more than 50% of seagrass beds were presumed to disappear. Artificial infrastructure such as floating cages for fish farms leaves a large volume of marine debris, especially after typhoons. Marine debris is deposited on the seabed near the port and fishing areas, and some of it washes up and accumulates on near and faraway beaches. Therefore, both managing natural resources and purifying the environment are key to the conservation of the blue carbon sinks in the coastal and marine national parks. Next. Here are seagrass restoration cases for conservation. I will explain it according to the order of the seagrass restoration process. Next. KNPS has been collecting submerged marine debris since 2017 to improve the ecological health of the marine and coastal national parks. Around 474 tons of SMD has been removed in the last 5 years near the port and waterfront to improve the condition of the Atlantic zone for the restoration. Next. After eliminating marine debris, seagrass is transplanted. Around 373,200 individuals of Zostera marina were transplanted during the last 5 years across 126,245 square meters of seagrass beds. In order to actively respond to the changing global environment, a mid to long-term plan by 2030 is ready to ensure the success of this project. Next. Field survey and monitoring are conducted regularly to check growth conditions, survival rate, density, length of the individuals, habitat size to verify the effectiveness of seagrass restoration by transplanting methods. The survival rate of transplanted seagrass varied from 0% to 200% after 1 year. Of course, it affected by various factors such as the characteristic of benthic area, water quality, and physical elements. Next. After the seagrass restoration, an increase in the density and number of eggs of marine animals and juvenile growth was observed. That means the general condition of the coastal and marine ecosystem has been improved and restored. Seagrass beds are serving as a spawning ground and nursery for marine life. Since last year, we have introduced and applied a new technology to increase the survival rate of transplanted seagrass and have verified its effectiveness. Next. Now, I would like to explain some seagrass restoration methods that KMPS uses in the national parks. The tape method is the most common technique to restore seagrass. After the fresh seagrass collected from the seagrass meadows, divers replant it on the seabed just like rice transplanting. It is important to fasten seagrass with staples to prevent it shooting away. Next. Another transplantation method is using eco-friendly porous blocks. KMPS has applied this method in the field in cooperation with domestic SMEs. We monitored and found that after 7 months since transplantation, the survival rate reached around 241.7%. Next. The eco-friendly porous block method is useful for areas with relatively high energy, where transplanted seagrass might be lost at an early stage. Using the experience and know-how of using porous blocks, KMPS is planning to try a new technique of attaching seagrass seeds to porous blocks made with biopolymer this autumn. Next. The last technique is the egg carton method, in which grown-up seagrass is put on the egg carton in advance and transplanting the whole plate on the seabed to enhance their survival rate. 72% survival rate was monitored after a year since the replanting, as it was a very successful pilot and at 한려해상 Marine National Park. We kept planning to improve it and apply this technique in many other sites in Korea for seagrass restoration. Next. In addition to the restoration of seagrass beds, KMPS is promoting the restoration of seaweed and salt marsh in the intertidal zone. Next. We tried to restore salt marsh damaged by reclamation, man-made structure, invasive species pollution, and so on. By considering the different characteristics of the species distributed by the height of ground, we transplant different halophytes according to the height of ground. Additionally, after removing ecosystem disturbing factors such as marine debris and salt marsh codgrass, we transplanted native species, which is another one of our restoration methods. Now, I will explain the example of salt marsh restoration to restore the habitat of mud flat crab. After demolishing concrete roads installed in the salt marsh, we favored natural stones like mosaic and transplanted halophytes by removing the wall consisting of waste tires built to protect farming lands in the upper area of the continuous intertidal zone. We installed the natural stone wall to nurture the environment where the mudflat crab can live. To this end, we conducted several meetings with the residents to come up with a compromise and obtain their consent to implement the project. Next. This photo shows the mudflat crab and halophyte, and the mudflat crab hiding on the stone in the restored salt marsh. Next. I'll briefly explain the restoration of seaweed and show you the relevant video. By using biopolymer concrete, a new technology used to restore seaweed, we helped seaweed such as Sylvatica silicosa grow in the tidal rocks. We worked with the local residents and fishing community and contributed partially to the increase in the income of the fishermen due to the increase of seaweed biomass. I ask you to enjoy this video. Please click the link on the screen to see the video that I prepared.
안전사고 교육 하도록 하겠습니다. 예방교육 하도록 하겠습니다. 안반 지역은 상당히 미끄러워요. 그러니까 그 지역 주민분들은 비교적 삶이 터전이기 때문에 미끄러지게 운전하는데 우리 직원분들 물론 해상원 많이 근무 경험이 있으시지만 항상 안전사고 유의해 주시고 안반 지역 다니실 때 그 폐강류라든가 따개비를 가스 위주로 밟아가지고 안 미끄러지도록 했으면 좋겠습니다. 자, 구 한번 외치시고 작업 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 제가 하나 둘 셋 하면 안전 화이팅입니다. 하나 둘 셋. 안전 화이팅!
이거는 경화제여가지고 이걸 굳게 해주는 성분이거든요. 이 짜리 B로 써져 있는 거는. 그래서 이 두 개를 혼합해가지고 골지하고 이게 섞는.
연안 개발과 지구 온난화로 해조류 개체수가 감소하고 있어 해양 생태계 종 다양성을 높이기 위해 해조류 서식지 조성 사업을 추진하고 있습니다. 친환경 기질은 해조류 포자의 부착 밀도를 높여 서식지 환경 개선에 효과가 있습니다.
과거에 해안가에서 많이 보이던 뜸부기가 최근에는 거의 보이질 않는데 이번 해조류 서식지 복원으로 지역 주민들의 소득 창출에 도움이 되었으면 합니다.
From now on, I will tell you about participation and cooperation in the promotion of the restoration project. Next. Seagrass is designated as a marine protected species. So permit or license from local government is required to collect it before the restoration project was promoted. We consulted with the local government which govern the collection and transplantation areas and obtain permission through administrative procedures. During this process, we also consult with the fishing community. The consent of the fishermen and local residents are prerequisite of a restoration project. In order to obtain such permission and consent, we often meet with public officers, representatives of the fishermen, and order to solve our problems and find solutions through discussions. Next. I will explain public participation. General volunteers educated and certified by KMPs. In particular, local divers of marine rescue teams work as volunteers to collect SMD to improve the marine environment. Next. Environmental NGOs and national park citizen survey teams are also involved in the investigation of SMD and ghost fishing gears. Next. Now I will label my presentation. Thank you for listening. ขอบคุณค่ะ
Thank you very much to Ms. Sukjin for the extensive presentations about the work to restoring the ecosystem in South Korea. And we see that in the ecosystem, they still have a different dimension. They have a seaweed, they have the salt marshes. In Thailand, we also have mudflat and salt marshes. And there's also existing ecosystem. We would like to apologize, almost 1 p.m. and there's still questions from the participants and also from the floor. On the left-hand side, there's a question since the first session. So I would like to take the time to answer the questions. Q&A, the first questions, that we have the questions from the participants on Zoom. And the question from Zoom is that to choose the location, the site for planting in the area that has a potential but has never had the mangrove forest before. Do you study about the impact on the existing ecosystem previously before the forestations or not? I'm not sure it's about seagrass or mangrove forest. So in the case that you want to plant in a new site that has no forest before, did you do any impact study? It is good that we think about planting in the area that we never have forest before. But to plant in the site that has previously no forest, we need to think about the ecosystem, about the environment in that area. For example, in that site, it's an area that is connecting to the delta, and it has no seawater, and the landscape has been changed. But you want to restore it. You want to plant trees. So you need to consider what would be suitable. For example, if it's the back at the back of the mangrove forest, it happened to be the area that is not flooded by the seawater. There's a lot of sediment, the tree is not really growing, but you want to restore it. So you need to consider that area. What's available? Is there any mud flat crab? Mostly it would be near the land and eat the vegetations, like those sea vegetations. So if it's in that characteristic, we might be able to restore by adding the potentials to the land, by make it the area that it could be a habitat for the mud flat crab. You can have a small creek meandering in there, and in some area you can plant trees. When you make a small creek in there, and when there's trees growing in the empty spot that is not flooded by the seawater, that already have the sediment, it could be the habitat for the mud flat crab. So it's a simple fishery. So you need to study about it, and then you would earn revenue from mud flat crab as well. So this is something you can do in parallel. So this is just one example, but it depending on the site itself. What is the characteristic of that site? So you need to study about the ecosystem, the flora, the fauna, the animals, and develop accordingly. That would be suitable for the location. So you would get the output and the benefit, and also contribute to the ecosystem services and environment. So we have to do assessment, because the ecosystem at different area have different combinations of the species. So it depends really on the topography and the location. So yes, we do need to have the impact study before we decide on the restoration process. And please, Dr. Ravitwan. My name is Chaviwan from the Foundations of the Sustainable Development for the Environment. I just leave it for food for thought, and then we can have answer later. Our foundations are utilizing the mangrove forest for the activity in the raising awareness, and also outdoor classrooms for the students. What I would like to say is that because we use the army at Bang Pu as a learning center, we received the support from the army with the Toyota company supporting the financials budget. So we use this mangrove forest for the classroom, and we also do them taking care of the area. And there's a problem of coastal erosions that they used the artificial mangrove to support this. So in the past 2-3 years, definitely that was a trend at that time. So I would like to ask the meeting that the artificial mangrove, should we use it? Is it good enough? Because the NESDC are supporting for the research funding. I am also the academics, and it's really troubling me because it's not nature-based solutions. So this is what I would like to leave. So if you want to discuss about this, if it's good, then I would let it grow there. If it's not, then we need to brainstorm to think about what to do. Should we continue with it, or if it's not? Because I would like to ask the moderator whether it's right. Yeah, I heard about the sea oars that made from rubber, like a stick, and they put it there. So sea oars for the coastal erosion, and together with an STDA. So at Bang Pu, it's a research project, and they ask permissions for the budgeting, and they study in this area, and it is a mud lane. And at the back is like a dike and a road. And the reason they put it there, it's actually accumulated the sediment. It accumulated it, and if there's more sediment, the level is higher, that would grow the real mangrove forest in that sea oars area. And they can remove the sea oars, the artificial mangrove forest, and stick it somewhere else if we can plant the real trees. So on the land-based side, if they can do it, if they achieve success, we say that, well, it's rubber. The price is dropping. So if it could be used as CRs, the artificial mangrove, and could develop them real mangrove forest, that would be good. We can move it. It could help the people as well. But what I would like to ask, to implore, is that please do it in some other area, some other site, like Samut Sangkram, Samut Sakhon, that is really the mud beach and mud flat, and there's no wall behind. Because we want to see whether it really could prevent the coastal erosions and how much sediment it could trap. And does it really become an effective measures for coastal erosion? So, and which way should we develop it? Because this is not a mangrove. It's just like a root, and they just stick it there. You know, the root that made from rubber trees. So we used to inform them, but we received no feedback. So this is also what we would like to ask. Because if it does really provide protections, and we can grow the real mangrove trees, and we can move it to some other area, that would be good. Because it's durable, it's long-lasting, and it's not like, you know, like wasteful. But for example, bamboo is always breaking, but the expense is very high. But if it's effective, then it is cost efficiency. We can move it to some other area for the purpose of the mangrove forestation. So, but there's no advancement. So that project received the funding from National Research Council of Thailand. So last question, please, because we're really running behind time. It's now 1 p.m. So I would like to thank all the panelists who exchange the knowledge about the restorations of the ecosystem for the mangrove forest and seagrass. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Somchai, Assistant Professor Dr. Anchana.
มิเกล and Miss ทุกจินชอนค่ะ เดี๋ยวในช่วงนี้เราไปพัก
So right now we would have a lunch break, and would like to ask your kind collaborations, everyone, to please come back at 1:40 in this meeting room. 1:40, please. So please come back at 1:40 for the